Hey guys, today I'm going to tell you 8 stories that sound unbelievable but are true, from a man who used his stomach to stop a cannonball to a plan to launch a nuclear bomb at the moon. Before we start, let me know where you live and what time it is now in the comments. I'd love to know where my audience is from around the world. Now, let's begin.
Now, let's imagine. You're a child, or even an adult craving a little adventure, and you hear about a water park. But this isn't your average water park with gentle slides. This place is called Action Park. And true to its name, action here sometimes means you're responsible for your own safety. The father of Action Park was Gene Mulvihill, a character hard to pigeonhole, part reckless entrepreneur with crazy ideas, part willing to challenge all safety limits, and perhaps part someone who truly believed visitors should be free to face danger. This creates curiosity about a complex figure behind an infamous park. He wanted a place where visitors truly owned the game, where there weren't too many restrictive rules. Sounds appealing, right? Freedom to explore, freedom to experience. But freedom at Action Park sometimes meant that the rides were designed based on ideas scribbled on a napkin during cocktails, and safety seemed to be a rather distant concept. Let's talk about the Cannonball Loop, for example. Can you imagine a water slide with a full 360-degree vertical loop? Just hearing about it makes your heart pound and your legs tremble. It's said that to test this ride, management used dummies, and the result was those dummies weren't exactly intact when they came out of the tube. Some even lost their heads. There were even rumors, later confirmed in documentaries, that employees were rewarded with $100, not a small sum back then, just for daring to be the first to try it. And a more gruesome detail, later, when the tube was dismantled, they even found teeth of unlucky riders stuck inside, becoming invisible blades for subsequent riders. Truly an unforgettable experience in its own unique way. Then there was the Alpine Slide, a long concrete track winding down the mountain. You sat on a small sled, controlling your speed with a lever. Sounds like you're in control. But in reality, with the steep slope, sharp turns, and not-so-sturdy sleds, it was a gamble. Just a moment of carelessness, and you could be thrown off, facing boulders. Countless people suffered scrapes and broken bones. More tragically, in 1980, George Larson Jr., 19 years old, died after being thrown from the slide and hitting his head on a rock. It's said the park tried to cover it up, even claiming the victim was an employee. And we can't forget about the wave pool, also known as the grave pool. The unpredictable, strong waves, crowded pool, and a depth of up to 2.4 meters turned this place into a trap. Lifeguards were often inexperienced teenagers. Sadly, there were 3 fatal drownings here. So why did Action Park survive so long despite the danger? Perhaps due to the risk-it-all culture of the 80s and Gene Mulvihill's cleverness in circumventing regulations, including setting up a phantom insurance company. Eventually, countless lawsuits and public pressure forced Action Park to close in 1996. The park recorded at least 6 deaths and thousands of injuries throughout its operation. Action Park, though no longer existing, remains a legend, a testament to how fragile the line between adventure and recklessness can sometimes be. It's also a costly reminder of the responsibility for safety that any business, especially in the entertainment sector, must prioritize. The smiles and excited screams of visitors can never justify a disregard for human life. From these somewhat out of control and danger-filled adventures on the ground, let's turn our gaze to a much larger space, a place that seems peaceful and distant, but was once the target of plans even more audacious and perhaps far crazier. Can you believe it? There was a time when world powers were not only racing to land on the moon, but also seriously considering turning it into a nuclear test site?
Sounds like a science fiction movie script, doesn't it? But this is a part of history, a secret buried for decades. To understand why such a crazy plan existed, we need to go back in time to the 1950s, the height of the Cold War. A tense atmosphere enveloped the globe. The Soviet Union and the United States, two superpowers, confronted each other on all fronts, from military and politics to science and technology. In 1957, the Soviet Union shocked the world by successfully launching Sputnik 1, humankind's first artificial satellite. It was a huge blow to American pride and prestige. The U.S. government felt they needed to do something truly impressive, a real shock and awe moment to reassert their strength and leadership. And amidst the fear, confusion, and the urge to retaliate, an extreme idea began to take root. That was Project A119, a top-secret plan of the United States Air Force initiated in 1958. What was the goal of this project? It was to launch a missile carrying a W-25 nuclear warhead, a weapon with a yield of about 1.7 kilotons. To put it in perspective, the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima had a yield of about 13 to 18 kilotons, meaning the W-25 was significantly smaller, but still a destructive nuclear weapon. The plan was to detonate this bomb on the dark side of the moon, near the Terminator line, the boundary between the light and dark areas, so that the explosion would create a giant dust cloud, illuminated by the sun and clearly visible from Earth with the naked eye. The purpose was nothing more than a display of U.S. military and technological might to the entire world, especially to the Soviet Union. Interestingly, among the team of scientists involved in this project, there was a name that later became incredibly famous: Carl Sagan. At that time, he was just a young graduate student, tasked with calculating the dispersal of the dust cloud in space to ensure it was large enough and bright enough to be observed from Earth. The project leader was physicist Leonard Reifel. They worked in absolute secrecy. And it wasn't just the U.S. that had such bold ideas. On the other side of the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union also harbored a similar plan, known by the codename E4. They also wanted to demonstrate their ability to reach the moon with an observable nuclear explosion. However, just like the U.S., this Soviet plan was ultimately not carried out, mainly due to safety concerns, such as if the launch failed and the nuclear warhead fell back to Earth, or if it didn't reach the moon but got stuck in Earth's orbit.
So why was Project A119 of the U.S. eventually canceled in January 1959? There were several reasons. Firstly, the cost of such a project was enormous. Secondly, more and more scientists expressed concerns about the unforeseeable consequences of a nuclear explosion on the moon, including permanently contaminating the lunar environment. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, was the risk if the missile launch failed. Imagine the PR disaster if a U.S. missile carrying a nuclear warhead exploded on the launch pad or fell into a populated area. Finally, U.S. policymakers realized that successfully sending humans to the moon would be a much more powerful and positive message than simply bombing it. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed, and our moon remains pristine, untainted by nuclear fire. Project A119 and Plan E4 are chilling reminders of how the Cold War could have pushed humanity to dangerous limits. Later, in 1967,
The Outer Space Treaty was signed prohibiting nations from deploying nuclear weapons or any other weapons of mass destruction in outer space, including on the Moon and other celestial bodies. This was an important step to ensure that space would be used for peaceful purposes.
Such grandiose plans show that humans sometimes have ideas that go far beyond ordinary imagination, don't they? But it's not just governments with national-level projects that have strange stories. Even in everyday life, there are individuals with life stories that are just as dramatic and epic. Let's go back to 19th century New York to meet an immigrant woman who built a criminal empire right in the heart of the world's most vibrant city. The person I want to talk about is known by the affectionate yet powerful name, Marm Mandelbaum. Frederica Marm Mandelbaum arrived in America around 1850 carrying hopes for a better life, like so many other immigrants. Initially, she and her husband made a living as peddlers on the bustling streets. Life was difficult, a struggle. But Marm was no ordinary woman. She had a sharp business acumen and rare courage. Gradually, from small-time trading, she recognized another opportunity, a shortcut to wealth, even if that path lay outside the law. She began to associate with child pickpockets, petty thieves, and became a receiver for the goods they acquired. Her store, outwardly an ordinary dry goods shop, was in reality a massive center for stolen goods. Marm was not merely a receiver of stolen goods. She was a true queen of fences. She organized and financed countless thefts, large and small, from expensive jewelry to precious bolts of silk. It was said that no valuable item was stolen in New York without passing through Marm's hands. She was notorious for financing sensational bank robberies of the time, such as the heists at the Ocean National Bank or the Manhattan Savings Institution, reaping enormous profits. She built an intricate network of connections, from street thieves and professional swindlers to police officers, lawyers, and judges. Anyone could be handled by Marm as long as there was a mutual benefit. The context of 19th century New York, with its rampant corruption, deep social stratification between rich and poor, and waves of immigrants seeking opportunities by any means necessary, seemed to provide the perfect conditions for a crime boss like Marm Mandelbaum to rise. But perhaps what made Marm most legendary was the School of Crime she opened right behind her store on Grand Street. It sounds unbelievable, but it was true. Her target audience was orphaned children, homeless teenagers with nowhere to turn. Here, they weren't taught reading or writing, but were trained in more practical skills for survival in the underworld. Pickpocketing, lockpicking, burglary, fraud. One of her most outstanding students was Sophie Lyons, who later became one of the most notorious female swindlers and blackmailers in American history, nicknamed the Princess of Crime. Interestingly, despite operating in the criminal world, some viewed Marm as an early feminist because she gave women, who had very few opportunities in society at that time, a path to earn a living and assert themselves, even if it was a wrongful path. Marm Mandelbaum was renowned for her loyalty and credibility in the underworld. If any of her partners were arrested, she was ready to pay bail and hire the best lawyers to defend them. She never betrayed those who worked for her. This earned her the respect of many in the underworld, even though the police always considered her a thorn in their side. Prosecutor Peter B. Olney was determined to bring Marm to justice. After many efforts, in 1884, the police set a trap, causing Marm to buy stolen silks that had been marked. A major raid on her store exposed the enormous scale of her criminal empire, mountains of stolen goods, from clothes and jewelry to antiques.
It seemed Marm's career was over. But no. With her cunning and network, she managed to escape to Canada, taking a large fortune with her and continuing her life outside the law there, though always yearning for New York. Marm Mandelbaum was an incredibly complex figure, a mother, a grandmother, a shrewd businesswoman, and at the same time a queen of the New York underworld. Her story is not just about crime, but also reflects a turbulent part of the history of a city in the process of shaping itself, where the lines between good and evil, between law and opportunity, sometimes became incredibly blurred. From the schemes and calculations in the shadows of the criminal world, let us turn to another story, where an ordinary man possessed an extraordinary ability, an ability that could bring life, but also cause unforeseen disasters. Let's meet Charles Heitfeld, the man known as America's Rainmaker.
Charles Hatfield was initially just an ordinary sewing machine salesman for the New Home Company, but beneath that exterior lay a strange passion for making rain. In his spare time, he diligently researched, experimenting with all sorts of chemicals, and by 1902, Hatfield declared success. He created a secret mixture of 23 different chemicals placed in large pans atop tall wooden towers. When this mixture evaporated and mixed with the air, Hatfield asserted, rain would come. He didn't like being called a rainmaker, preferring to call himself more scientifically a moisture accelerator. Initially, many were skeptical, but Hatfield proved his abilities. In 1904, some ranchers in Los Angeles, desperate from drought, wagered $50 to hire Hatfield to make rain. He and his brother erected a tower, sprayed the chemical mixture, and surprisingly, rain indeed fell. So impressed, the ranchers paid him $100, double the agreement. Meteorologists said it was just a coincidence, a natural storm was approaching. But Hatfield's fame began to spread. He was hired to produce 460 millimeters of rain in Los Angeles and succeeded, earning $1,000. In 1906, he was even invited to the Yukon region in Canada to summon rain for gold mining operations. Although that attempt wasn't as successful as hoped, he was still paid $1,100 for his efforts. But the most infamous incident, and also the peak of Hatfield's career, occurred in 1915 in San Diego. The city was experiencing a terrible drought, its reservoirs nearly depleted. The city council, under public pressure, decided to hire Hatfield. A verbal agreement was made. Hatfield would be paid $10,000 if he filled the Morena Reservoir. Hatfield got to work. He again built his familiar tower near Lake Morena and began his magic on January 1st, 1916. And then the rain came. On January 5th, the first drops fell. Then the rain grew heavier, more intense. January 10th, 15th, 20th, the rain was relentless. Dried-up rivers suddenly became raging torrents. Bridges were washed away, train tracks derailed, telephone lines were cut. The city of San Diego was submerged. Lake Morena was not only full, but overflowing. On January 27th, disaster struck when the nearby Lower Otay Dam broke, killing at least 20 people and causing enormous property damage. Hatfield, of course, insisted he had fulfilled his mission, filling Lake Morena. But the San Diego City Council refused to pay the $10,000. They even threatened to sue Hatfield for the damages his rain had caused, estimated at $3.5 million. Hatfield didn't back down either. He countersued the city. The lawsuit dragged on for 22 years, and in 1938, the court finally ruled that the rain that year was an act of God. This meant Hatfield was not liable for damages, but it also meant he didn't receive a single penny for his work. So, did Charles Hatfield actually make rain,
Or was he just a talented amateur meteorologist who knew how to calculate timing and got lucky? His formula of 23 chemicals remains a mystery to this day, as he took it to his grave. Many scientists believe he simply released condensation nuclei into the air, similar to modern cloud seeding techniques, but on a cruder scale. Whatever the case, the story of Charles Hatfield, the man who claimed he could control the weather, remains a strange and fascinating chapter in history, a reminder of the fine line between science, belief, and the mysteries of nature. From the efforts of an individual to tame nature, let us move on to another story, a scientific experiment that seemed simple but has lasted for nearly a century, challenging our patience and even our perception of time. This is the story of the famous pitch drop experiment.
Imagine an experiment that began in 1927 and is still ongoing today. At the University of Queensland in Australia, Professor Thomas Parnell initiated a simple yet profoundly insightful experiment. What was his purpose? He wanted to demonstrate something that many might find obvious yet difficult to observe, that pitch, the black viscous material we often see on roads, is actually a liquid, albeit one with an extremely high viscosity. To do this, he heated a sample of pitch, poured it into a glass funnel with a sealed neck, and then let it settle and cool for 3 whole years. In 1930, he cut the stem of the funnel, allowing the pitch to slowly flow out if it truly was a liquid. And it flowed, but at an incredibly slow pace. The first drop of pitch took a full 8 years to form and fall. The next 5 drops took another 40 years to fall. But the irony is, even though the experiment took place right in the laboratory, no one actually witnessed that historic moment. And this bad luck seemed to plague the experiment for decades. The 7th drop fell in 1988, when Professor John Mainstone, the custodian of the experiment at the time, had just stepped out for a drink. And it fell. By the 8th drop in 2000, a camera had been installed to monitor it. But ironically, right at the crucial moment, the camera malfunctioned. Most recently, in 2014, when everything was almost ready for the pitch drop to fall, scientists decided to replace the beaker underneath before the 9th drop fell. A small vibration caused the pitch drop to break off, not counting as a natural fall. To date, 9 drops have fallen, and the whole world is still patiently waiting for the 10th, with no telling when it will finally decide to drip.
While the Queensland experiment continued with its unfortunate misses, a similar experiment was initiated at Trinity College Dublin in Ireland, starting in 1944. And in July 2013, scientists here achieved what their colleagues in Australia had not. For the first time, they filmed the entire process of a pitch drop forming and falling. That video, though only a few seconds long, became a phenomenon, a testament to a process that took nearly 70 years. It's truly indescribably unlucky for the Queensland scientists, having started so many years earlier, only for their neighbors to scoop the historic moment. I bet the professors in Australia could only look at each other and chuckle ruefully at that point, right?
From the incredible patience in the laboratory, let us move to a story about a different kind of patience, an almost obsessive dedication of an ordinary woman who silently undertook an extraordinary mission to preserve a part of the audio-visual history of an entire generation. This is the story of Marion Stokes and her massive collection of videotapes. Imagine, before Netflix, YouTube, or convenient digital video recorders, there was a woman who decided to record everything broadcast on television. Not just a few favorite shows, but everything, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for over 30 years. That woman was Marion Stokes. She was a former television producer, a librarian, a social activist, and also someone who, it was later recognized, exhibited signs of hoarding disorder. So what motivated Marion Stokes to undertake such a monumental and somewhat peculiar task? It all began in earnest in 1979, during the Iran hostage crisis. Marion believed that news and television programs were invaluable historical documents. She feared that important information, diverse perspectives, could be lost, forgotten, or even distorted over time. She wanted to preserve them, not just for herself, but for future generations, so they could look back at the past, learn from its mistakes, and better understand the world that shaped our present. And so, she began pressing the record button on her Betamax and VHS recorders and almost never stopped. The scale of the collection Marion Stokes left behind is truly astounding. It's estimated there are around 71,000 videotapes containing hundreds of thousands of hours of broadcasts, from important news bulletins, sitcoms, documentaries, to even commercials. To store all these tapes, she had to rent multiple apartments. Not only videotapes, she also collected hundreds of old Macintosh computers and tens of thousands of books, newspapers, and magazines. Her dedication, or perhaps obsession, reached extreme levels. Every 6 to 8 hours, she had to change tapes, regardless of day or night, whatever she was doing or wherever she was. It's said that even when having dinner at a restaurant with her family, she would calculate the time so she could get home in time to change tapes. She did this for an important reason. At that time, television stations regularly erased their old recordings to tape over them with new programs to save costs. This meant that a lot of valuable television content was at risk of disappearing forever, if not for people like Marion Stokes.
Of course, Marion Stokes' actions also raise questions about the boundary between dedication to a noble cause and hoarding disorder. Her personal life and family relationships were undoubtedly significantly affected by this mission. But the immense value she left behind cannot be denied. After Marion Stokes passed away in 2012, her son, Michael Medlitz, decided to donate the entire massive collection to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library. The process of transporting and digitizing these tens of thousands of tapes was an incredibly costly and complex undertaking, requiring many years and millions of dollars. But its value to researchers of history, media, culture, and society is immeasurable. Marion Stokes' archive contains previously unknown historical moments, lost programs, and advertisements that reflect social life through different periods. It is a unique window into the past, an invaluable audiovisual legacy created by the almost unbelievable perseverance of one woman.
From a woman who dedicated her life to preserving images and sounds, let us move to another story about a woman whose identity remains a mystery, but whose face became immortal in an unexpected way and even helped save millions of lives. This is the story of L'inconnue de la Seine, the unknown woman of the Seine. Let's go back in time to the late 19th century in glamorous Paris. It is said that around the 1880s, the body of a young, unidentified woman was pulled from the river Seine. The cause of death was believed to be suicide. As was customary at the time, her body was displayed at the Paris morgue in the hope that someone would come to identify her. No one came. But what stunned and haunted everyone who saw her was her face. Though deceased, her face still held a serene, mysterious, and somewhat contented smile. That smile was heartbreakingly beautiful.
A morgue attendant, or some accounts say a pathologist, was so captivated by her strange beauty and mysterious smile that he decided to make a plaster cast of the girl's face. And then the unexpected happened. Replicas of this death mask began to be produced and sold widely. It became a fashionable decorative item in art salons, in the studios of painters and sculptors throughout Paris, and spread across Europe. She was called the Drowned Mona Lisa. The face of that unknown young woman became a romantic symbol, an inspiration for countless works of art, poetry, and literature. The writer Albert Camus even compared her smile to that of the Mona Lisa. But the story of L'Inconnue doesn't end there. Fate had a much more important role in store for her face, a role connected with life. Decades later, in the 1950s, a Norwegian toy maker named Åsmund Lærdal, who would later also become a pioneer in first aid, received a special request. He was tasked with creating a life-sized mannequin to teach cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, a first aid technique that was still relatively new at the time. Creating the body of the doll wasn't too difficult, but what about the face? Lærdal wanted a face that looked natural, neither too masculine nor too feminine, and importantly, one that had a serene expression, not frightening to learners.
And then he remembered the mask of L'Inconnue de la Seine that he had once seen hanging on his grandparents' wall. The serene, slightly mysterious, but not at all frightening smile of the unknown young woman seemed the perfect choice. And so, Åsmund Lærdal decided to use the face of L'Inconnue de la Seine to create the first CPR mannequin and named it Rescue Anne. Since then, Rescue Anne, with the face of the unknown young woman, has become the standard CPR teaching tool worldwide. Millions upon millions of people have learned how to save others on this very face. It's a truly poetic irony of fate, isn't it? A young woman ends her life in a cold river, her name unknown, her story untold. But then, her very face, with that mysterious smile, becomes a symbol of life, the most kissed face in history in a very special way, through CPR practice. It's estimated that if L'Inconnue had been found in time and someone had performed CPR, she might have been saved. But instead, she has saved countless others through her unexpected legacy.
Now, let's turn to another story, also about the human body, but about the incredibly unbelievable endurance of a living man. A man who turned his body into an impenetrable fortress, challenging even the most powerful punches and even cannonballs. Let's meet Frank Cannonball Richards, the man with literally an iron stomach. Frank Richards, born in 1887 in Kansas, USA, was not your average strongman. His extraordinary ability was discovered rather accidentally while he was serving in the Army during World War I. He realized that his abdominal muscles could withstand tremendous impacts without any harm. And tremendous here doesn't mean ordinary punches. He said his Army buddies would often try punching him in the stomach for fun. After the war, realizing this was a rare talent, Frank decided to turn it into a livelihood. He joined circuses and began performances that left audiences wide-eyed with amazement. Initially, he allowed anyone in the audience, no matter how big and strong, to punch his stomach with all their might. A barrage of thunderous blows, but Frank stood firm, perhaps even a bit bored, as he felt no pain. His fame spread so far that even heavyweight boxing champions of the era like Jack Dempsey and Jess Willard came to test their strength. And the result? Even their lightning-fast punches couldn't make Frank flinch. It's reported that Jack Dempsey punched him 75 times consecutively, and Frank still stood as if nothing had happened. Frank's performances became increasingly upgraded.
He didn't just stand still to be punched anymore, but would lie down and let multiple people, sometimes 4 or 5 grown men, jump on his stomach at the same time, or let others use a large wooden plank or even a sledgehammer weighing nearly 10 kilograms, which is about 22 pounds, to swing with full force at his abdomen. Each time the resounding thwack made the audience's hearts skip a beat, but Frank remained calm. People wondered, was there any limit to this man's endurance? And then Frank Richards unveiled his ultimate masterstroke, the performance that made his name Cannonball, taking a cannonball fired directly at his stomach. Of course, this wasn't the gunpowder-fueled cannon used in the military, but one powered by a spring. Yet its firing force was still incredibly terrifying, estimated at around 200 pounds of force, which is equivalent to 90 kilograms of force, enough to be fatal to an ordinary person standing nearby. In the performance, Frank stood less than 1 meter, about 3 feet, from the cannon. The cannonball used weighed a hefty 47.2 kilograms, or about 104 pounds. When fired, an extremely powerful force propelled the cannonball into Frank's stomach, sending him flying backwards several meters. The audience held their breath, but then Frank slowly got up, dusted himself off, and smiled as if nothing had happened. No matter how iron his stomach was, Frank admitted that this cannonball act was quite intense, and he could only perform it about once or twice a day, fearing internal organ damage if he did it too much. He continued performing like this for many years, traveling widely and astounding countless people. Frank Richards passed away in 1969 at the age of 81, not from his dangerous performances, but from natural causes. Doctors later confirmed that the horrific impacts of his past seemed to have had no effect on his health at the end of his life.
And that's the final story in our journey, exploring the strange but true things of our day-to-day. From dangerous amusement parks, secret government plans, to criminal empires, rain gods, experiments that lasted a century. It's wonderful that you've watched until the end of the video. Hopefully, through these stories, you've found something interesting, a little surprising, and maybe a fresher perspective on the colorful world around us. Which of these stories impressed you the most? And if you have any feedback, please share it in the comments section below. And if you know any other strange but true stories, don't hesitate to tell us. Don't forget to hit the like button if you found this video interesting, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future explorations, and hit the notification bell to be the first to watch our latest videos.